Young men, romantic relationships can be absolutely exciting, fun, exhilarating, but I want to make a case to you. I think most young men today aren't ready, should not be in a relationship because they are not emotionally mature, and this is contributing to a great extent the breakdown of the relationships, the stagnation, the disintegration, the disillusionment. This especially because young men, you are not ready yet. You haven't invested in being emotionally prepared or mature to being in a relationship. I would say the greatest need in relationships today is the courage to be honest with yourself and with your partner. Now, this is absolutely scary, and I think this is why most of us young men do not invest the time in preparation. For a huge part, maybe because we don't know how to do it. We want to be there, but we don't know how, and the prospect of trying to embark on trying to get ready to be emotionally mature is daunting. It's actually quite scary. So, the greatest need, like I say, in relationships today is the courage to be honest with yourself first and then with your partner. So many of us do not know what this means because we have not experienced it yet. Stay tuned because that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to encourage and inspire you to what integrity in the midst of your romantic relationships could look like. Most of us have a legitimate desire to be in a romantic relationship. That's a wonderful thing. That's a fantastic thing to appreciate and experience. But when we don't prepare well for it, it can actually go amok. And I know because I have my own history in this. In fact, I'm going to share with you a little bit of what my practice is, some of the things I've learned towards the end of this conversation. But the big bonus I also wanted to share with you at the end of this conversation is how to have the courage to face rejection. Now, rejection is a part of most guys' experience in the dating world. Most of us experience rejection on an ongoing basis, and it's not a fun thing unless you have the mindset to be able to know how to interpret rejection in a way that does not leave you feeling less than, that leaves you feeling that you're not quite up to the standard that is required. I'm going to give you some insights on how to face rejection through integrity courageously. So stay tuned. But let's talk a little bit about integrity and why it's so critical in dating. You see, walking with integrity, let me just define integrity really quickly. Integrity is the consistent desire for one's internal values to be aligned with their external actions while being true to themselves and respectful of those around them. It takes courage, young men, for us to even consider walking with integrity. It takes courage because to walk with integrity requires us to do what most are freaked out about doing, and that is, are we able to look internally within ourselves and to be able to see what the state of affairs is under the radar here, under the hood here, if you will. If we look at ourselves as a unit that way, can we look at ourselves and be able to say, okay, here's where I'm presently at? That is a really scary proposition for so many of us in general, but especially I'm speaking to you, young men. It's a scary thing because when you haven't dealt with something for a very long time and you've sort of ignored and left it untouched, it's a scary thing to come back to. I'm not sure if you can relate, but if you're young and you were required to keep your room clean, if you neglected keeping your room neat and tidy over a span of time, it kept on getting messier and messier, so that by the time you were confronted about it, all of a sudden you've got this mammoth of a task to try and clean up your room. Whereas if you just kept cleaning it in every day in little short bits and just keeping up with it, it wouldn't be a big deal. For most of us, we're like the room that we have neglected for years, and now there's so much messiness internally that we have to deal with, and that's a scary thing to look internally. And so it takes courage for us to finally take ownership and responsibility and accountability and look at ourselves with a realistic frame of lens and say, wow, I need to get aware of what's going on inside of me. I need to start bringing some order into what's happening in my mind space, in my heart space, and the feelings and the intellectual capacities, and to try and bring some order there, especially by committing to walking with integrity. That takes massive courage to be able to look at yourself, scary as it might seem. There is tremendous courage for those who are committed to walking with integrity. And here's why integrity is so critical in the midst of dating relationships. What's happening in a dating relationship? You're connecting intimately with a partner. You are giving them bits of yourself. You're telling them about yourself. You're going through experiences. However, when we've not learned how to be honest with ourselves first, then we're not able to really be honest with those around us. When we haven't been honest with ourselves, when we haven't taken an honest look internally to our inside of ourselves and dealt with affairs at the home base here, we can't, in essence, extend that honesty now to others because we don't even know how to be honest with ourselves. And if we don't know how to be honest with ourselves, we're entering into this really intimate connection where you want to share so many beautiful things inside, and yet you don't know what it is that you're sharing because you don't even know where your starting frame of reference is. And integrity helps us to know what our values are. It helps us to look inside ourselves and say, here's where I'm presently at, but here's what I value. Here's what I want to align with actions-wise. When we don't know that, and yet we're connecting ourselves with someone and giving ourselves away emotionally and physically in all these intimate ways, if we don't know who we are highly susceptible to the temptation of compromising our values that we never even knew. And when we don't know our values, we start imbibing someone else's. We start yielding to their expectations for us. This leads to a sense of guilt and shame because we're kind of confused. Like, where do we stand and how do we engage with how we are coming into a space? And so without personal values, we yield to others' expectations. This really contributes to us feeling unfulfilled and unsatisfied because we're thinking about when we connect with this person here, we want to bring something worthwhile, but we don't know what we're bringing that's worthwhile because we don't even know ourselves. And as a result, it's quite unfulfilling, unsatisfying, unhappy. So when courage is absent in the midst of a relationship, the courage, first of all, to know oneself and to know what one is sharing with others, that takes courage. It's a vulnerability thing when you're like, I'm going to give you parts of me that I don't have, like generally that other people have access to. When courage is absent in a relationship, what tends to follow is a dishonesty and a lack of integrity. Let me say that again. When courage in the midst of a relationship is absent, what tends to follow is dishonesty and a lack of integrity. I know what this feels like because I did this for a couple of decades at least with some of the most closest relationships. That's part of one of the reasons why I'm divorced now. I'm divorced because I lacked the courage to be honest with my wife. I remember before we got married, I made a commitment to myself saying, I'm going to tell, if I ever meet the woman of my dreams, I'm going to tell her my whole life story so that she knows who I am. I'm going to tell her the honest truth. That's going to take courage. I was scared. I finally worked up the courage to doing it, but halfway through telling and disclosing my past, I freaked out and I only told half the story. When she caught me after we got married, in my dishonesty, I told her straight up, I wish I'd had the courage to do this before, but I didn't have the courage. Lack of courage in a relationship leads one to dishonesty and a lack of integrity. The dishonesty betrays the trust that the partner has extended to you in a very deep way. I know what that's like too. I know what it's like to burn the trust of those who you really care for, but never were honest with. It's a painful thing when you burn someone's trust that way because you were dishonest, because you lacked the courage to be honest. Lack of integrity compromises your values and you begin to lose respect for yourself and you don't have much of a self-esteem. Young men, as I say this, when I say that lack of integrity compromises your values, can you relate with me when you feel that sense that you don't have any confidence as you navigate in this world? Can you relate with me that way where you're like, I don't even take myself seriously. I don't even think of myself highly at all. I lack any sense of self-respect for me because I'm not walking with integrity. Can you relate with me? Because that's where I was for many years as well. And in the midst of a relationship, this usually leads, this lack of honesty, this lack of integrity leads to arguments. And what follows there is a heightened tension and conflict, and it eventually often results in the break of the relationship if you guys aren't just kind of like hanging around and try to make it work, but you don't have any skill sets to progress. It's scary when we choose to be honest. It's scary when we try to choose a path that requires courage in a relationship. But this is what happens from when we give up on even engaging with integrity in the relationships that are most dear to us, these romantic relationships. Can you relate with me, young men, when you are seeing your experience that the lack of honesty, lack of integrity brings so much messiness into the relationship, where you feel more distant from this person that you really care about, but you don't know how to be honest with them? It's a really painful thing to have this beautiful connection that is stunted because you can't experience it for all that it's worth because you lack courage in being honest. Do you see why I title this integrity in dating with a courage, the missing link, which is honesty? It's scary to be honest, isn't it? Let me give you a contrast, so dear young men. With integrity, you gain a sense of clarity and confidence, especially in your personal values, especially knowing what you stand for, especially knowing what you're bringing to the table. Let me say this again. With integrity, when you commit to walking in integrity, you gain clarity. You're able to think clearly and say, I know what I'm about here. I know how I'm engaging. I'm going to share with you how this plays out practically in relationships from my own experience at the end. So stay tuned. If you haven't already done so, do subscribe if you're finding especially value in this content here. With integrity, when you commit to walking in integrity, you gain clarity. You gain a confidence. All of a sudden, you know what you stand for and how you're going to present yourself. This leads to healthy relationships because you're depending on you for your own values and how you see the world. You're not waiting for someone else to dictate that to you. You know what you're coming to the table with, saying, here's what my values are, here's what my commitments are, and here's how I, in essence, engage with my world with consistency because my values align with my actions. You're bringing some tremendous value to that relationship because you know what you stand for. You're more emotionally mature. I was not emotionally mature for the longest time, and that was the greatest cause of my lack of confidence. But when you are emotionally mature because you're walking in integrity, you're able to handle conflict far better, again, because you have clarity. You're able to have deeper and better connections with others, especially those you're in a relationship with. There's also a greater sense of self-worth. And in addition to that, you also have mutual respect with your partner, and trust continues to increase. All this because you've committed to walking in integrity. Young man, I could just stop this conversation right here and say, therefore, pursue walking in integrity. This is your ticket to milking these beautiful relationships that mean so much to you that so far you've been struggling in. If you were to commit to walking in integrity, man, you would increase in so many ways. You would have so much net worth because of what comes from walking in integrity. You would get your emotional health back. You would know what you stand for. You would have clarity. You'd have confidence. You'd be emotionally mature. You'd have a better way of engaging when conflict does come up. You would have deeper and better, more fulfilling relationships and connections, and your self-worth increases. You'd have mutual respect and trust. Goodness, how is this not a win-win scenario? Men, it takes courage to walk with integrity. It's a high cost to walk with integrity. But when you do so, you gain so much. You gain so much. Do you hear me? You gain so much from the equation. So, you must have courage to practice integrity in your life. And this is why it's so critical to do this before you get romantically connected. Don't do this while you're in the midst of your relationships, because then you're continuing to figure yourself out and you have so much to grow. Do this before you get romantically connected. So critical. Don't get involved romantically until you figure yourself out. Because when you bring a messy self that is not sorted out, you bring a whole bunch more pain and turmoil and fights and conflict and tension in the midst of that relationship with this person that you really care about. But when you say, I'm going to just put this on pause so that I can work on me, and then you diligently commit yourself to walking courageously in integrity, you start transforming into being a person that you're like, I'm like a really amazing package now. You bring so much value. You have confidence, you have courageousness, you are able to bring a sense of awareness and emotional maturity to that relationship when you commit first and foremost to working on yourself courageously and walking in integrity. How do you do this? Take time for yourself first and foremost. What does it mean, my dear listener, to be you? What a funny question, perhaps you might be thinking. No, what does it mean to be you? How well do you know yourself to know this is what really matters to me? If I were to ask you at the very core, what is your identity? How would you respond, young man? What would you say that this is what it means to be me, and here's what really translates to making me the best version of me? Like, what does that look like? Do you know? Take the time to know what your values are. This is where I encourage you again, do this by yourself. Go away and shut yourself off for like a specified, maybe an hour, half an hour, like commit that time. This is your time for yourself, and get to know yourself for yourself. Write down the things that you really mean a lot to you. So many today don't know who they are, and yet they're trying to share themselves with those that they really care about romantically, but they don't even know where to start. And so what are you bringing to that relationship? What are you bringing to enhance and beautify this relationship as you both try to contribute when you don't know this? Spend time for yourself figuring this out. And then this is going to help you to know not only what your values are, but how you're trying to change and become consistent. You may realize, man, something that really means a lot to me is honesty. I really value honesty. But it's interesting that even though I value honesty, I'm not really honest in my life. I'm not really one who's committed to walking honestly, but I really value it. So now you're seeing a disparity. Your values are over here, but your actions are over here. So you start working on yourself to say, how can I become more and more a person who is consistently honest? How can I align my actions to my values? And as you do this, you start becoming true to who you are, and you start believing in yourself more, and you can see a huge difference in your evolution, and you start being able to be a lot more confident in what it means to be you. When you spend time investing in yourself this way, don't skimp out. Do the hard work to make yourself a better version of you before you even engage and extend yourself romantically and connect with someone else. Seek out mentors. Don't do this alone. Look around you in your community. Don't look at your heroes that are inaccessible. Look around you. Who are the people you have access to right now? Is it a coworker perhaps? Is it maybe a family member? Is it a friend? Is it someone in your community of faith or in your community of hobbies that you're part of? Who are those individuals that you identify and say, I really honor and respect where they're at. I like what I see in them, and I want to become more and more like you. Seek out these individuals and ask them, can I hang out with you? Express a desire that you want to grow in character, and you see some things in them that you want to try and emulate. Look for friends that also share in your values and who are committed to their own personal growth. Watch who you're spending time around with. If you're spending time with people who don't give a rip, why are you spending time around them? They're going to take away your intentional focus and you becoming better. Look for a different group of people that are going to invest and go in the same direction with you this way. And remember, practicing integrity takes courage. And this is definitely a prerequisite for walking into a relationship. Definitely a prerequisite, without which you are really bringing much more chaos into this relationship. Secondly, first of all, take time to know what your values are. Secondly, practice self-awareness and practice self-reflection. Start being honest about your assessment of you. What does it mean to be you? That's being self-aware. If you were to look internally and figure, how am I feeling about about myself right now? How am I feeling in general at this present moment right now? You're starting to identify those areas about yourself by way of thoughts and feelings. What does it mean to me in this space here? What makes up my thoughts? What are the areas that I'm ignoring? What are the areas that I think obsessively about, for example? Identify those areas that you see improve in this area. Like the example I gave you earlier, I value honesty. I'm so far from being an honest person. I need to realign there and start making improvements in those areas. Maybe you need some help. Maybe you can't even afford to go into a psychologist or a therapist. The internet is actually right now. Look for those who have contributed resources to find helpful ways of working through whatever it is. There's so much out there. You struggle with anger, you struggle with bloodletting, you struggle with gambling, whatever it is, start pursuing being a better you. Start being self-noticing. Here's where my strengths are, here's where my areas of challenge are, and then start working in these areas. And here's what it means for me to commit myself to walking in these areas. Challenge yourself as you pursue being better, because you're going to face some uncomfortable truths along the way. Lean into those challenges, face them. That's the courageous step. Work into getting comfortable with the idea that you and we are messy. All right, good. Let's acknowledge that. Let's stop trying to present this facade that's a lie to ourselves first and foremost, that there's nothing wrong here. No. Let's be honest about it and say, there's some things about ourselves that are really uncomfortable, and we're gonna do the courageous thing, young man, and look at ourselves in the mirror and say, what do I need to be aware of about me that I need to address and change? It's challenging because as we face those uncomfortable truths, we become more self-reflective, self-aware, and we increase in courage. It leads to a healthier, fulfilling relationships first and foremost, not with our partners romantically, but with ourselves. Have you ever thought about that? That you're in a relationship with yourself, and the more you're able to commit yourself to walking with integrity, the more you're able to walk into that trueness of what does it mean to be me? And how can I accept me? And how can I love me even as I progress this way? Remember, courage is not about being fearless. It's not about saying, I got nothing to be scared about. No. Courage is really about facing our fears and still persevering through in the midst of those fears. So, be aware of what your values are by spending that time. Secondly, practice self-awareness, practice being self-reflective. Thirdly, be patient. Be patient on many fronts. So many of us have this internal, I am so lonely and I want to be in a romantic relationship and I want to be there now. And so you rush into any opportunity. And for so many of you young men, you struggle on the dating apps. You struggle because all you see is rejection after rejection. And we're going to touch on rejection in just a moment, so please hang on. But you face so much rejection and you feel you're so desperate for a connection, an intimate, deep connection. You're not just looking for the sex. You just want to connect deeply, and you're desperate for that, and you're lonely, and that makes you desperate and needy and longing, and that's a really bad combination. Because when you do that, you start bringing down your values, you start bringing down your expectations, and you'll just settle for anything, which is awful. And the most devastating part about all this is that you never started off at the place that you needed to start off in the first place, and that's with yourself. And that's why I say, be patient. I know it's easier said than done. And you're like, no, I need this right now. And what I'm saying is, but if you were to take this, what you feel you need right now, you're gonna stunt yourself even more, and you're gonna regress. And I've been there. I know what it's like. But if I can make a plea to you, young man, be patient. Pause on that. If you want to have some specific ways of how to do that, drop me a line. I'm happy to make a whole entire video that's a even more in-depth part, but we're not going to touch on that. But just pause, because what you need to acknowledge is the disparity. You feel so desperate for your need for a relationship over here, but you don't even feel any desire or desperation for you to work on you. Do you see the imbalance here that is really glaring? feel so desperately for your need outside of yourself, and you don't feel like you can fulfill your needs from internally. And that is like a really unhealthy balance. That's an imbalance there, a gross imbalance. Because what ought to be is that you need to be finding satisfaction in yourself first and foremost before you look for it outside. When you place your dependence for satisfaction outside of you, you are so helpless. You are like a sitting duck. Your satisfaction, your worth depends on something outside of you that someone else kind of dictates, and you're in essence giving away your power for your own self-worth. But when you take back your own power and find your worth in yourself first and foremost, right here, all of a sudden you've got a superpower that you are now engaged in the world on your own terms, and you're the one that's saying, I'm not sure if this is up to my power or my quality. That's why we want to walk in integrity. That's why we want to know who we are and what our reference point is. And we want to be working off of that beacon that it all starts right here, not out there. So be patient. Don't give away your power, young man, to like saying yes to the first girl who says yes to you. That's desperation. No, be really picky and choosy. And even before you choose, patience in working on yourself first. If you're seeing this huge imbalance here that is so gross and awful because you're denigrating yourself, you're making yourself worthless, that needs to be addressed first. Bring this down, like fast over here. Don't even go over here, but start working on you, because you need to be a better version of you. And this is a courageous step. It's a scary thing when you look at yourself and you're like, oh, when I see myself, I am worthless. When I see myself, I'm unlovable. When I see myself, and you say all these things because you've never actually invested in yourself. That's why I'm having this address to you, young man, especially in what does it look like to have integrity in dating with courage, especially with a missing link of honesty, not with others first and foremost, but with yourself. Be patient and honest with yourself and say, what does it look like for me to know what my values are and to become self-aware and self-reflective? This is really important, really important. Start with you first. I promise I was going to talk a little bit about rejection. Let me just shift to that now. Now, this is a painful one because it's not painful for me anymore because I've sort of processed and dealt with it. I'm going to share with you my insights. This is the bonus. Thank you for listening up to this point. It takes courage to face rejection. It takes courage to face rejection. But there's a couple ways of facing rejection. There's a way of facing rejection where you feel like you're less than, and there's a way of facing rejection where you're still steeped in your self-worth because you always had your power. Rejection is not a reflection of your worth. Can I say that again, dear listener? Rejection is not a reflection of your worth. If you feel like it is, it's because you've given away your power to someone else for them to dictate your worth. What I'm talking about here, if you are willing to follow where I'm hoping to lead you in these paths of walking in integrity, is to find your own worth in here first, where no one can take it away from you. That's you having your power. So, rejection is not a reflection of your worth. Your worth is not tied to someone else's perception of you. It should never be. For so many of us it is, because we've given away our power. But let me say, take back your power. Take back your power by saying, I'm not going to find my sense of worth in what someone else says about me. And when you don't see your worth because of what someone says about you, and you find it in here first, all of a sudden when you start receiving rejection, when people are saying no to you, especially romantically, you're reminding yourself saying, oh yeah, that's just them saying I'm not a good fit for them. But I know that my worth was never tied to that rejection. My worth was always safe right here and right here. That's what happens when you commit to walking with integrity, is you start finding your own sense of self-worth and confidence here. It's unassailable. It's a superpower. Your worth is your power and how you see yourself as you walk with integrity. Let me say that again. Listen carefully. Your worth is your power. When you see how you see yourself when you're walking in integrity, when your values align with your actions and you have confidence in saying, I know who I am and what I stand for, you're one who's steeped in your worth. Don't give away your power. Find your hell yes and stop being needy and desperate. Stop saying, oh, I'll just take anyone. No. Find your worth first here. Because when you do, others start responding to you on your own terms. And they start trying to qualify to measure up to the standard that you set. Rejection is not a reflection of your worth. Your worth ought to be here where you have your own power. I hope I wasn't speaking Greek to you this whole last couple of minutes, but that's a huge, hopefully, epiphany for so many of you. Now let me give you a challenge. This challenge is not to say do as I do, but I'm just challenging you by sharing with you how I sort of engage in my romantic exploration. My worth is safely right here. I get lots of rejection too, yes, and I also reject some. It's not my way of saying you're not up to worth my while. It's just my way of saying you're not the right fit for me. I know what I'm looking for and I'm very specific, and I'm not going to bring down my bar because I have a very specific expectation of what my romantic connection is going to look like. But first and foremost, before I ever connect with someone romantically, I want to find my own sense of worth here. Now here's what I do. When I go on a date with someone, by this second date, here's what I personally do because I'm committed to honesty. And I'm committed to honesty because I lived for so long without honesty. By the second date, if not the first, if I want to go further with this individual, I'm going to tell them my whole truth on that date. And when I say my whole truth, I'm just telling them the key highlights from my life of messiness that may cause them to say, I'm not sure this is the right connection. I want to do that right at the outset because I don't want to have them having any unpleasant surprises later on, about 3 months in, when they're like, okay, now I've connected romantically and emotionally with you, and now you're telling me this, and this is like a deal breaker for me. I don't want that. So my commitment is I tell the truths, my messy truths from my past, saying here's my past, here's me cheating on my wife, here's me doing X, Y, and Z in my past that may be something that you are not accommodating. And I want to do that right at the outset, especially because if there's going to be rejection, I want that to happen at the outset where this individual that I want to care for has not connected emotionally at a deep level. I want to give them everything that enables them to know what their response is going to be. For some, they'll be like, oh, that's not a big deal. Let's move on. Others might be, I'm so sorry, that's a deal breaker for me. I want to give them that gift of transparency and honesty right at the outset. That's my commitment in my dating, to courageously walking with integrity and in filling this missing link of honesty. And my challenge to you would be, what does that look like for you to be honest with those that you're thinking of romantically connecting with? But even before you do, my assertion is I don't think you should even be considering. I think you should first and foremost work on you. Don't bring your messiness into a relationship where you involve someone else. Figure yourself out first and then engage romantically. What do you think? That's a pretty controversial stance, I imagine. I would love to hear your thoughts, so push back. Give me some considerations that I may have missed along the way. I would love for this to be a conversation, and that happens in a two-way street. I'm not telling you this is the way it has to be. This is just my perspective, and I would love to hear your insights or your thoughts on this. But that's sort of what has made sense to me, and that's what I want to share and encourage and challenging you with. I hope this has been a helpful conversation, though. It's one that is sorely needed because so many of us young men are trying to figure out what does it look like for me to navigate these tumultuous waters. Some of you are in the midst of some messy stuff. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts. And of course, if you haven't already done so and you feel that this has been really helpful, I would appreciate you subscribing and joining in this community, because this is what I'm doing for the foreseeable long-term, committing to growing with you as we explore what integrity could look like in our lives, especially as men, as young men. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Ciao.